trying to get the film look on digital is something that has been extremely popular for a lot of filmmakers, color graders, editors in the past couple of years. And I feel like it's pretty hard to do because it's easy to overdo your film look or underdo it and not be able to really sell the film look. I've had the opportunity in the last couple weeks to test Dehancer, so a plugin for Davinci Resolve that is giving us the ability to create that said film look. We got this clip here of my brother walking from a trip we went on earlier this year in Morocco. So let's grade that using Dehancer. Once you download Dehancer, you can find it in your effects tab all the way down. So let me pull Dehancer here. Okay, right off the bat, Dehancer gives this kind of greenish, extremely grainy, a little bit overdone look, but don't worry yet. We can modify all of this. Into Dehancer, you will start with your input here, which is basically their own version of the color space transform. Your source, if you shot on Rec 709, you could leave that at Rec 709, but I'm gonna choose a camera. I shot this on a Sony FX3. See, it's already doing something. And then S-Log3 S-Geometry C. All right, so this is our base. And then we're gonna delve a little bit through all of those settings here. So there are a lot, but honestly, you don't have to understand all of them. And it's a plugin made to really have fun and experiment with it. And I've had a lot of fun in the past couple of weeks. I'm gonna grade this clip and give you a little bit of my advice as to how I personally use this plugin, the settings that I use the most. So one thing I'm gonna say is that not everything is necessarily in the best order. You definitely want to start with the input here, your kind of like color space transform, and then you can switch up your exposure a little bit. Let's bring that up. Maybe temperature is a little bit warmer, and then the tint is a little bit greenish, so let me pull it a little bit more pinkish. All right, so you would start with your input here, but one of my first tips for you guys is that you have your film here and your print, and there's all those three settings, film developer, film compression, expand, between both of those. But I would recommend going to film, print, and then doing all of those others, and I'll show you guys why. Your film print is your profile. It's really what Dehancer is known for, right? So they have researched all of those film stock, photography film stock, actual cinema film stock, and even Polaroid. So you can see that you have Kodak option, Polaroid option, Rolei option. So all of those film stock are here. They're all kind of like presets, and there are so many options. You would start by taking one of those and just, experiment with it. What do you want here? Do I want something less contrasty? Okay, Vision Tree, 200T, pretty cool. So I'm gonna go with the Gold 200 here. All right, now why I suggest, well, first of all, you have the push-pull, which is basically what they would do with your film stock when developing it. So you can push it or pull it in one of the two directions, and it's gonna affect the profile, the film stock you used in a much different way depending on the profile. So make sure you always test it out. See, I like the Gold 200 because it was a little bit warmer, but maybe I can just pull it back down and I get a little bit more of a bluish tint, which I kind of love because this is supposed to be blue hour, right? Why I would suggest after your film stock, going into the print section instead of going in all of those other settings. The print section is if you were to print that still, right? Print that film stock, have it physical. You have a cutter of options. Think of it as like the finish of your look, right? The physical finish of your look. And you have a couple of options here. You have Cine on Film Log if you want to keep putting LUTs or other grades on top. You have the Fujifilm one, which is pretty cool, but pretty intense, as you see here. You have the classic Kodak 2283, which is an orange and teal look that is really, really popular in Hollywood, classic film look. And my favorite from experimenting, the Kodak Indura Glossy paper, which is a type of paper finish that you would print. As you saw, this created a lot of contrast. And this is why I really suggest going into the print film, and then the print right before touching anything else. Because after both of those, which gives quite a look, you're gonna go into film developer and then you can change the contrast, right? But if I did change the contrast and I brought it up before going into the print section, then when I would have put my Kodak Indura Glossy paper, the contrast would be overkill, like overkill, right? So this is why I recommend go into the film section, go into the print section, and then go back into film developer and change what you want to change. So film developer is another section for basics. So you're gonna have contrast and gamma, color separation, color boost. And you always have the options to enable and disable what you did in this particular section, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like deactivating or reactivating a node, but since you're doing all of this work in a single node, you have the options per section to disable and enable. All right, so for this particular shot, I feel like I want to bring down the contrast a little bit. I want to get more information with all the little boats here. Gamma correction, it's basically an exposure setting, but it works a little bit different because as you see, my highlights are not really getting that much exposed. I'm just correcting where the gamma hits, so maybe a little bit more information in my shadows here, okay. And then color boost is a way to saturate your image. It's not literally saturation, but it does boost all of your specific color, right? So the orange have been boosted, the blues have been boosted, but then again, the building here has not been boosted that much because we didn't have much of a color here. So you can play around in here. I don't typically use color boost that much, so I'm gonna be okay with the film developer here. And we're gonna go down in film compression and expand. I'm gonna go down to expand first. Expand is a way to expose your image because one of the review I heard and I also felt with Dehancer is that it does create a lot of contrast in your image. So you can lose a lot of the information here. Let's say in his shirt, we don't see the difference between his shirt and his pants. So we do have a lot of contrast that has been created, especially with the print finish here that we did. So if I am to change a black point, I can, you know, just work with the contrast in my shadows or more darker areas. So I might bring it down just a little bit around here, and then you can change a white point as well, right? So you could literally just expose your highlights as much as you like. You can change pretty much your highlight however you want, and I'm gonna bring them down a little bit here. Now, we haven't touched film compression. Film compression is actually pretty cool. When you shoot on film, on actual film stock, something that happens a lot is that your highlights and your overall dynamic range will just render differently than if you shoot digital. And you can often see that in the skies, where the skies don't have much of like a brighter gamma than the rest of your image. And you can use the film compression here with the impact to actually change that, right? So I'm not necessarily exposing my sky, right? Like the exposure is not changing. I'm literally just compressing it so I get more of an organic feel, right? Like here, the whole sky is kind of like blending in, it's white, it's dull. If I bring it down, I'm just compressing the whole thing and I get more organic colors and just, I don't know how to describe it, but I really like going into film compression, putting a lot of impact, and then you can switch around the white point. If you pull it to left, you can see that we have more of a change between where the sun was and the rest of the sky here. But I like to blend in my sky, so pull it to the right, and then we have just a sky that blends in really well. And we can disable that, enable it, and you can see everything that it did. Color density is going to be really minimal, but I'm going to try to explain what I see here. So if you pull it to the right, you have, you know, more colors. Literally everything is just more saturated without having too much saturation. But what I like is to bring it down a little bit. And when you bring it down, let's go all the way down, you still have saturation. Your image is still saturated. What it did is that all of the colors kind of like blend in towards an overarching theme or like an overarching aesthetic to your image. We still have oranges here. We still have oranges here and actual blues, but the orange tend more towards the blues and the blues tend more towards the orange. So we have more of like an actual theme to our image. Let's say footage on, say, Kodak Vision 3 or Supra 100 or Cine Still 500. You would always get a specific look from that particular film stock. And I feel like bringing down the color density, you're able to kind of like get this overarching theme. And in this case, I wanted blue hour, so I keep everything in more of the bluish side. And then we're gonna go into all those other sections here. Color head is something that some people might want to do on a different node because it's similar to the new color slice panel, or even similar in some way to the color warper or all of those, you know, pick a color and change that particular color type of stuff, right? It's kind of like a split toning, but built into Davinci Resolve. And I personally like how they did it in Davinci Resolve. I feel like since we don't have the actual, you know, colors here, it's just written yellow, blue, magenta, green. It might be a little bit less intuitive. As an honest review, I think it could be interesting if Dehancer added kind of like actual colors in their plugin if it's possible, or just a way that is more intuitive, but it is still pretty intuitive. If we go into the color head here, we're gonna be able to change specific colors. So let's say I want to change, you know, the yellow and the blues. Wait, let me just enable that real quick. Pretty much the whole image is blue, right? So this is why if I bring it to the right, to the left, I'm gonna have more of a yellowish image, whereas I can do the opposite and just go into that bluish tint, right? So it does have a pretty nice look because it bases this whole change on the rest of your settings that you did here. So you could go for a specific look. If I wanted something more dreamy, I would go into the cyan red and pull them more towards the pinkish side. And where it gets really, really interesting is when you go into the color head here, but you go down to the shadows, midtone, and highlight. And this is gonna be your actual split toning, right? So you could change the same way you change the hues of some colors here. You could change that, but only for a specific, you know, exposure place in your image, right? So if I want, let's say the highlights, I want to put a little bit more pinkish, but I want to keep the rest of the image blue. I'm going to go into the highlights here. The shadows, you see the whole image is blue, but I feel like the shadows got a little bit too much of like a blue fade in them. So I'm gonna go back into the shadows, and I think I'm gonna bring it to the right a little bit, just so that we lose that bluish tint a little bit. Yeah. So color head depends on the clip. Some clips is gonna be extremely useful if you wanna change the sky, change it a certain color. Let's say we have green leaves and we wanna bring those green leaves more towards like an orange. After the color head is where Dehancer gets extremely interesting. Film grain, halation, bloom, and all the rest. One thing that I see a lot of people do online is that you can get a lot, or you can get a lot of even plugins or just node graph structures that will help you achieve film tones. But I feel like the big difference between Dehancer and most of these LUTs and plugins is that Dehancer doesn't let you only get the film tones and color, it lets you get the film look. And there's a big difference between only film colors or film look. And the film look, to really sell it, you need all those other settings, which are, of course, film grain, halation, and bloom, but also film breadth and gate weave. One of the best film grain I've ever worked with. I like the Davinci one is already really good, but the film grain from Davinci is extremely cool. And what's really cool between all film grains, halation, and bloom is that all three of those have the same presets, right? So if I want to sell this as if it was shot on 8mm at ISO 500 because it's at night, I could put all of those with the same preset and have kind of like this Super 8 look. That's it. I'm not gonna go that route here. I'm gonna go full frame, and you even have up to medium format with 65mm. But where film grain gets really interesting, in my opinion, is that you can go into custom here, and then you have all of these settings. Of course, you can change the size, you can change the amount. My personal tip for you guys is that usually when you shoot film, grain is not gonna render identically on every part of your film of your shot, right? So the highlights have more information, more light coming through the camera, so you will have less grain or almost no grain in the highlights, whereas you're gonna have more and more grain as you progress towards the midtones and the shadows. And this is something I go do by going into custom here in the film grain. I usually remove all the grain from the highlights, and you can see here that those are not perfect highlights, they're actually midtones, but you already have less grain over here than you have over here where it's darker, right? So I usually bring down all the highlights, bring down the skin tones, the midtones around here, and the shadows I put way more grain, because this is how you would typically get grain on actual film. You would have way more grain in the shadows, less in the midtones, and almost none in the highlights, because the highlights had enough information, enough light coming in through the camera. So this is my personal tip for you guys. Go into custom and change with around this curve here, shadows, midtone, highlight of your grain. After that, halation, we all know what halation is. Something really, really cool about halation in Dehancer, if you enable the mask mode, you're able to see exactly where your halation is hitting, which you don't have, I think, usually with the typical halation plugins. And then you can, you know, go into custom, of course, in the halation, you know, limit the source less and just diffuse it even more. Let's go just all over the top here, just to give ourselves a better idea. Remove the mask, and boom, we have a shitload of halation here. Let me just diffuse this a little bit less. So I'm gonna put it around here. I feel like halation is something you don't want to overdo, because unless you're shooting like on cine still, most film stock have halation, but not as much as I see people put some halation on digital footage when they try to sell the film look. So just a low-key reddish outline on the most like important parts of your image here. All right, so that's good with elation. Bloom, honestly, I personally use a Pro Mist filter when I shoot, so I already have a lot of diffusion going on, so I'm not gonna add any bloom, but if you wanted to add a lot of bloom, you have all these options here. You can see how it diffuses the image. The image is already not that sharp because I use a Pro Mist filter, so I'm not gonna use bloom here, but you have the option. And then we get to more of like project per project, depending what you want to do, you know, options here. So film damage is literally just going to be, you know, damage to your film. So I don't really play around with film damage. I like to keep something quite clean. The same way that I'm not going to use overscan. Overscan here, you have a shit ton of option. Overscan is basically just putting those black frames, right? So for specific projects, it can be really cool. Instead of having to put an overlay and then your whole Davinci Resolve gets laggy, you have all of these overscan options directly in the plugin here, which are totally customizable, which actually have animations in Move. So this is pretty cool, but I'm not going to use it for this project here. Honestly, really amazing that they did add it with a lot of preset and customization in the plugin, but it's really subjective to your project. Film breadth, I really adore. I don't know if we're going to be able to see it here, but yeah, so film breadth, what it does, if I try to explain it, is that the rendition, like the kind of like temperature and white balance changes every like single frame or somewhat. So if you look closely at the wall, of the brick wall, you can see that on some shots, it's gonna be more greenish. Like here it's more greenish, then it's more pink, then it gets more greenish again, right? This is not the shot where you see it the most, but film breadth kind of gives this flickering colors, really low key. You still have the same grade, it's just flickering the colors a little bit, and subconsciously you will see how it affects your footage, but only subconsciously. So it's not overdoing anything, it's just a little bit of an edge that sells the film look, right? And gate weave is gonna be this kind of like shakiness to the whole footage where it's just jittering a little bit. It's not like adding handheld shake, it sells this kind of like frames jiggering in the camera when you roll an actual film stock, right? Cool to have it, and it can sometimes create a pretty cool effect. And then we have the classic, you know, the vignette. If you want to have a vignette, I'm not going to use a vignette for that shot because I want to keep my sky really open. And you have all those other options. Monitor, you literally have false color directly in your plugin. How cool is that? And you have your clipping. I haven't found myself using it a lot, but it's still cool that they have it. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the output. Something extremely cool. Say you want to save this grade, right? And you want to use it on another clip you have down here. You like the direction you took with the grade, but you just want to tone it down a little bit. You have the total output of your whole grade, and you can put the whole grade, but 50% intensity, right? Or like 85. And this is pretty cool because if you don't want to go back and scale down all of those settings that you did, you can literally just go into output, pull down the whole grade. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this look. I think you have something really filmic. You could have less grain if that's how you felt, but honestly, you have something already cool. I feel like it blends in really well. We have this overarching theme. We keep our blues, we keep our orange, but they just fit in so well together. Now, talking about the pros and the cons. The pros, in my opinion, are really the fact that it's almost an all-in-one plugin, meaning you could have from temperature and exposure and tint up to your colors with the print and the film stock, up to even your tools like the film grain, the halation, the bloom, the gate weave, all of those in one single node. You don't get lost in like 30 different nodes. And then again, the tools like the film grain, the halation, the gate weave, and the film breadth are extremely detailed and useful, and some of the best I've used in a while. Third advantage and pro of Dehancer plugin, in my opinion, is how many profiles and film stock they have. So there are so many profiles, and they've been studied for over 10 years by the team at Dehancer, and they are quite surprisingly good, honestly. Dehancer even has an iOS mobile app, so you have pretty much all the same settings on your iPhone if you want. And then the last pro, honestly, is that it's a plugin that is just so fun to test and experiment. I've had so much fun just grading different clips, spending way too much time grading clips and just testing different ways. And you could even grade using Dehancer the same clip in like 2, 3, 4 different ways. So you have so many options, and it's really just fun to test and experiment. Now, regarding the cons, it's just things that I think could be improved. I feel like, first of all, it's easy to overdo your edit and have way too much stuff going on, way too big grain, too much contrast, and just not sell the film look that great because you have way too much halation or bloom or whatnot. And as soon as you put the Dehancer plugin, you can see that you already have a lot of contrast, a lot of greenish tint, and so it's easy to overdo it. It's also easy to get overwhelmed by the plugin. There's a lot of stuff, so I feel like the order is a little bit confusing sometimes and you can get overwhelmed. One of the last thing which I didn't really cover is the fact that there's not a particular setting in Dehancer for skin tones. There are ways and places where you can work around the colors that are typically for skin tones, but I feel like it would be nice to have a whole slider just for skin tones and bringing back the skin tones from pinkish to yellow and just making sure you can narrow down those skin tones when you have them. But that said, I am extremely happy with Dehancer. I feel like it really made me love color grading even more, and I've had so much fun, and I've been able to get some really good grades for personal project as well as commercial projects. And if you want to do the same, they did offer me a 10% discount code that you can find in the description if you want to get Dehancer for yourself and try to experiment with it. So have fun guys, hope that helped, and I'll see you guys in the next video.